Welcome to Read Talk. I'm Margaret Marco.
And I'm Courtney Miller.
Joining us today to share his read-making insight and expertise is John D., Professor of Oboe at the University of Illinois. Let's talk reads. Welcome, John D. We're so thrilled you could join us today.
Thank you, Margaret. Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here, and I think what you're doing for everyone out there, all the students that we have, and it's just a wonderful endeavor. So thank you for doing this.
Well, thank you.
We would like to start by asking you to describe the qualities of your dream read.
Oh, wow. I suppose we've all had that experience, I hope, at least once. A dream read is one of those reads that somehow allows us to play everything musically and technically much easier and essentially effortlessly, at least it seems so, while enjoying, balance and symmetry and the stability and the sound along the way. It's a great feeling and not easily forgotten. I'm a bit of a golfer too, and it's not unlike making that one great golf shot. It only happens, once in a while, at least for me. But having known it and felt it, it brings you back, wanting to experience it and feel it again. So whether it's a golf shot or an oboe read, we're talking about, it's the same type of experience. It's wonderful, and I think it sort of leads us in the direction of the quest to find that read, to bring it out of every piece of cane that we start working on.
Ah, yes.
It keeps us coming back for more.
Exactly, right.
Do you have any read tests that help you on your quest, pursuing your dream read?
Yeah, there are two I think of pretty immediately. The first one I credit to Joe Robinson, who took over for me down at the Conservatory of Music at Lynn University in Boca when I got the job and the professorship here at the University of Illinois. The read resistance test, and it involves releasing every bit of air possible from your lungs till nothing seemingly is left, then placing the reed in your mouth. And if you can still re-articulate several sounds on the reed, it's vibrating pretty much enough. So it kind of proves that you don't have a lot of air or support behind the reed at all. And that's a great test just to see if your reed is playing at the minimum amount of effort. The other one is pretty common to most of us, and that would be the crow exercise, just to achieve a double octave C. And if the lower C doesn't speak, the reed is not balanced well enough, and usually it's just too hard. You have to take more wood off.
Thank you for sharing those with us. The first one I haven't heard of as much, and I think it's really helpful so that we aren't overdoing it, over expending our energy on a reed that's not vibrating fully.
Absolutely. I think we all find that students particularly work very hard to play on reeds that are just too hard, and they're doing it maybe because the knife technique or the knives aren't sharp enough, or they just quite don't know where to take off, or they're afraid to take off of the heart, and so they're battling the resistance of the reed, and all in an attempt to have a dark tone because they're afraid of being thin and chirpy, and that's understandable. But I think that resistance test is a good one to really keep yourself in check. Absolutely.
Could you tell us about your setup, what gouge you use, and your shaper tip, staples, and all that good stuff?
Yeah. Through the years, I think all of us teachers that have been around for a little while, we have virtual museums of knives and sharpening stones and lots of equipment. I have several gouging machines that I've collected through the years, and they're each set up to accommodate variations in cane diameters and other considerations. For example, I have 3 RDG, which I love, but they're each with different bed diameters and bed-to-blade ratios. In addition, I have 2 Inaletti machines, a Genet, a Graf, and a Brannan. I like to gouge between 58 to 62, usually 60 in the middle. And I have machines that are set up to also provide slightly thicker sides than traditional, more or less as an experiment, but it's been interesting. I like using the Inaletti machines for their flexibility in providing immediate control in the selection of the middle thickness. And this is particularly advantageous once the density and resilience of a particular bunch of cane we might be working on is determined. For example, if I have a softer batch of cane, I like to gouge it a bit thicker, perhaps 62 to 63, which might be considered by some to be too thick. That can offer some stability where the cane itself doesn't necessarily provide that. And harder cane, on the other hand, a bit thinner, maybe 58 to 60, in that range. So it's kind of fun to have that ability to adjust with the Inaletti. But, I'd still like to get a Ross machine and a Kunibert and a Reeds and Stuff Radilla model gouger, because I've had some wonderful cane gouged on each of these machines. And so I think the search is still on for, the right equipment and the right gouge.
Yeah, you just need a few more gouging machines there in your museum. I'm curious how you determine the hardness versus softness of the cane before you start gouging.
Well, there are various tests. Of all things, you'd think I'd be the first one to run out and buy one of those density testers. It's almost like a dial indicator. It has a spring-loaded tension bar that presses down against the cane and registers various degrees of density. I don't have anything like that. I was trained actually by one of my teachers, Gladys Elliott, who was just a wonderful reed maker and so thoughtful about everything she did. And she would teach me everything from, a fingernail test to flicking test. I think we all know those, where we flick in our fingers, we listen to the sound, we see with our eyes the response of the cane, how it responds back to the bending. And through the process, even when you're processing, splitting the cane, pre-gouging it, guillotining, you listen to it, you watch how it responds. Also by going through the process with a couple of the reeds, once you lay your knife on the reed and determine how much work it takes to actually get it to vibrate. Some of the cane, like Rigatti cane, I find personally, I love it. It's very dense and takes a long time to make the reed and scrape on it. But some other canes from South America, they'll scrape you just take the bark off and they seem to want to vibrate. And it's lovely, but it's just so different. So I think we just have to get used to it. Sometimes it's in the coloration. The darker, more speckled cane, which Ralph Gomberg used to love, which I've come to believe is more dense. The whiter or more neutral, lighter shades tend to vibrate more easily and would be considered softer. And so they might serve different purposes. When I played the Florida Grand Opera for 20 years down in Miami, you still needed good reeds, but I tended to gravitate more to the lighter reeds as opposed to the darker symphonic stage type of reed. So it depends on the purpose that we're trying to fulfill. But I think going through the process has always been a great advantage, I think, from picking tube cane and being able to really sense what you're working with at every step of the way.
Right. What's your favorite cane nowadays?
I'd still hold to Rigatti. I just think that cane is across the board for me and most of my students. When I ask them, what are you using? Just, for me, it tends to be a little more dense, a little longer lasting, a little harder, a little longer to make a reed, but that's my favorite brand.
Great. Well, thanks for that tip.
That's a good tip.
I'll order some right away.
Right.
Well, I think we need to have lots of cane, have lots of sources, label it carefully, save it, date it, put it up on the shelf, let it age, just like a fine wine. Some cane gets better over time, and it gives you options. But boy, there's no excuse for an oboe player to run out of cane.
So true. That's
well said.
Yeah.
Shaper tips. My go-to recommendation for shaper tips has been and remains the RDG -1 or -1 narrow. I've always thought that the RDG tips, and, well, they're gouging machines as well, back with Bob Gilbert and Nancy doing such a great job out there, they've maintained a wonderful standard of machining, quality tips, and their handles are great. And so I think it's a great go-to, particularly to start. I think you could spend your whole life in that realm of tips. I also use the Mac Plus, the Mac Pfeiffer, Mac Plus Plus, and the Brannon Extra Narrow. Those are my go-tos.
Great. How about staples?
Yeah, at this point, after all these years in experimentation, I've tried a whole lot of different staples. And I might be a little boring, but I still like the real cork 47 millimeter tubes, even though, I've experimented too with 46 millimeter and the composite cork, which I think is a great idea, but it tends to separate from the tubing many times in my experience. And I just think that whether it's brass, which I think are fine, or silver that are a bit stronger, I like the Pisoni, I like the Leray, the Rigatti, but the real cork seems to fit in my reed wells, in my oboes, consistently over the years, better than others. And I think I consider them to be slightly warmer in tone than some of the all-metal tubes for my taste. I like to prepare my tubes and taper the metal around the openings, at both ends of the tube. So the bottom of the tube, where the tube joins the start of the bore at the top of the oboe, and the oval opening at the top of each tube where it meets the vibrations from the cane. I like to take a razor blade or a plaque, and I like to bevel and just trim the metal on the inside a little bit around in both of those areas, and then I can use a metal file to clean it up so there are no jagged edges. And I think the reason I do that is just to lower the air resistance at those points. And it helps. I remember taking an instrument in to be fixed by Bill Brennan up in Evanston back when I was in college, and I came back to try it, and he was an excellent repairman, one of the best, and I just said, Bill, it's not quite right. There's resistance, and he said, well, it must be your reed. And then he showed me. He took my reed and he said, look at watch this. And he sort of reamed out the metal at the bottom. It's not only the metal that could be an obstacle, but after a reed's been used, or if you don't clean your tubes, which is very important, you can have calcification or gunk that is distributed around the bottom or the inside of the tube that, once again, can really inhibit airflow. So different reasons for keeping your tubes clean and also trimmed. But he showed me that, and it's amazing. I worked at Nielsen's back in the day for 3 or 4 years when they were in Chicago, and I came back and I told Mrs. Nielsen about the trimming idea around the edges. She said, "Oh, really?" And then she had her cork supplier do it. We learned so much from these people like John Simer and John Peterson and Carlos Coelho, and just so many people out there that know so much that we can learn from.
Especially the repair people. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Definitely.
Let's talk about tiling.
Yeah. Well, it's a funny thing because, none of my teachers ever recommended any time measurement, but rather they instructed to only place as little cane as possible onto the tube, just so the cane will close when you reach the top of the tube with your thread, that it'll close and seal without an air leak, and no more cane on the tube than necessary. Mm-hmm. So what does it mean if you don't have a tie length? It means you're putting it on about halfway, and then you're, depending upon your sight memory, to wrap up the tube to the top, and when you're just about there with one wrap left, is it closing or not? You have to unwrap it, pull it down another millimeter or so, rewrap it, or if you've overshot it. It's a lot of fussing. So I just started measuring a bunch of successful examples and to see what tie length would work well, especially for different shapes that would play into that factor. And 73 won. And I think we can also always tie either lower at 72 or longer up to 74. I think that's probably the range that most students should be thinking of.
Exactly.
We have so many variables in reed making, and
Yeah.
we just need to try to